It's the greatest battle yet. Maya, Govan and Melanine, and welcome to a brand new Tolkien Untangled Silmarillion Explained series. Over the next few weeks, I will be talking about the 5th Battle of Beleriand, a battle so massive and so important to the history of the First Age that I need a whole trilogy of videos to talk about it. And this is the battle that will decide the fate of everything that's to come up until the very end of the age. It is an absolute turning point in the Silmarillion. However, before I talk about this 5th battle, I should probably briefly recap the previous 4, and kind of lay the groundwork of what's going on in Beleriand during this period, and how we got here. So I guess the first thing to reiterate is that pretty much everything I've talked about in the Silmarillion Explained videos, and everything I'll go on to talk about before the Second Age, takes place here, in the lands of Beleriand, which are a part of Middle-earth, but they're not the part that we're familiar with from The Lord of the Rings and The Hobbit. Beleriand is a vast area, but it only exists in the First Age. And the story of what happens to it, and why Middle-earth looks so drastically different in the Second and Third Ages, is basically what the Quenta Silmarillion is all about. But for the purposes of this video, there are 4 great battles that have so far made up the War for Beleriand. And as with every single war that takes place before the end of the First Age, the villain, the guy that our heroes are fighting against, is Morgoth, the original Dark Lord, the guy who first created the Orcs, who corrupted Sauron and the Balrogs into his service, who stole the titular Silmarils from the Noldor of the Uttermost West, and who came to Middle-earth with the intention of conquering, ruining, and utterly destroying all the elves who live there. And so the first battle of Beleriand takes place pretty much immediately after Morgoth arrives there. And at this time, there are no Noldor in Beleriand, there are no High Elves, no Calaquendi, no Elves of the Uttermost West, who in future battles will go on to be the main characters. Instead, the first battle is fought between the armies of Morgoth and the indigenous Dark Elves of Beleriand. And there are 3 factions of Dark Elves who fight in this battle. First are the forest-dwelling Green Elves, the Lyaquendi, who are, by all accounts, the least mighty elves to appear in the Silmarillion. I mean, they're generally really nice, but they're not warriors, and they suffer huge casualties in this battle. Not least among them, they lose their king, and they never take another after. Second, there are the Falathrim, the maritime elves of the coastal havens, and these guys are among my favourites. Their lord is the one and only Círdan the Shipwright, one of the greatest legacy characters in all of Tolkien's entire legendarium. Not only does he show up right at the beginning of Elvish history, but he's also present 10,000 years later right at the end of it, on the final page of the final chapter of the final book of The Lord of the Rings. Círdan is an absolute legend. However, the third and mightiest faction of Beleriand's Dark Elves are the Sindar, the Grey Elves, who are ruled by their High King Eleuthingol and his angelic Maya wife, Melian, a being of the same order as Sauron. Now, thanks to a bit of help from the dwarves of Beleriand, the Sindar and their allies are able to resist Morgoth to an extent in this first battle, but they cannot beat him. And eventually the 3 elven factions are separated and each beleaguered, and if given enough time, I think each one would have been wiped out entirely, but they're not. And that is due to the arrival of the Noldor, and thus the outbreak of the Second Battle of Beleriand. Now, I go into full detail on this first battle in this video, so check that out after this if you haven't already. But whereas the first battle doesn't really end in, like, victory or defeat for the Free Peoples, the second battle very much does. This second battle is remembered as the Dargor Nuin Gileath, which means the battle beneath the stars. And kind of confusingly, this is the first battle in the War of the Jewels. This is the first battle to feature the High Elven Noldor of the Uttermost West. This is the video where I talked about that in full, but the short version of it is that Feyenoor, the creator of the Silmarils and the guy who kind of gets the story going, he journeyed to Beleriand to take vengeance on Morgoth for the murder of his father and the theft of his beloved Silmarils. And compared to the Dark Elves of Middle-earth, the Morroquendi, the Noldor are kind of like super elves. They are enriched by the light of the uttermost west, and so Morgoth's orcs are absolutely no match whatsoever for their military might. The Noldor obliterate their enemy, and the Dargor Gileath is a stunning victory for our elven heroes. I mean, Fëanor does die immediately after it, but to be honest, that's not too much of a loss. He was kind of a terrible person by the end of his life. Anyway, 60 years after it comes the third battle for Beleriand, the Dargor Aglareb, which is translated into English as the Battle of Glory. And as the name suggests, this is another astounding victory for our Noldorine heroes. After Fëanor's death, his half-brother Fingolfin becomes the new High King of the Noldor, and under his leadership, the Noldor settle in Beleriand, they build realms and very complex alliances with the local Dark Elves, and when Morgoth sees an opportunity to exacerbate conflict among them, he takes it. And he launches another great assault upon the Noldor, in which his armies are absolutely annihilated. Upon the battlefield, the rival factions of the Noldor finally unite, and like a hammer upon an anvil, they obliterate the orcs and slay everyone down to the least and last. In fact, the victory of the Dargor Aglareb is so all-encompassing that for 400 years afterwards, Morgoth and his armies are locked away and besieged within their underground fortress of Angband. This is the video where I talk about that, but during the 400-year-long siege of Angband, everything is pretty awesome in Beleriand. It's a great time to be alive. Except, eventually, the long peace does end, and the fourth Battle of Beleriand begins. The Dargor Bragolak, the Battle of Sudden Flame. Now, the previous three battles were all a big deal, but the Dargor Bragolak is, up until the fifth battle, in a league of its own. This is huge. In his opening gambit, Morgoth sent rivers of flame from the peaks of Thangorodrim, the three tallest mountains in Middle-earth, and these fires destroy the Noldor's defences and they break the elven siege outside of Angband's gates. They burn the grassy meadow of Ardgalan into a desert of ash known as Anfauglith, the gasping dust, and after the flames and the poisonous fumes subside, Morgoth's army emerges to lay ruin to the north of Beleriand. And turns out, Morgoth has learned a few lessons from his epic failures in the Dargor Gileath and the Dargor Aglareb, and this time he has far fouler things than just orcs fighting in his battle. If we look at a map, we will see that there are three main elven realms at this time in the north, and each one is ruled by a different branch of the Noldorine royal family. In the west, there is Hithlum, the lands belonging to Fingolfin and his eldest son Fingon. In the middle is Dorthonion, where two of Galadriel's brothers rule from the Highland Forest, and in the east are the lands of the Sons of Feyenoor. Now, I don't want to get too bogged down with details here. There's a huge amount to say about this battle, and I definitely recommend this video to learn all about it, but what matters right now is that it is an absolute disaster for the elves and their new mannish allies. In the east, the Sons of Feyenoor are assaulted, and although Fëanor's eldest son, Maedhros the Tall, an absolute legend who will be very important over the course of the series, he stays put in his fortress atop the Hill of Himring, and he continues to resist Morgoth's armies like an unstoppable force of nature, but all the lands around his solitary hill are burned by the dragon fire of Glaurung, who is also pretty central to what I'll talk about both in this series and in the next one. He is one of the First Age's most iconic villains. So apart from Maedhros' Hill of Himring, all the rest of the northeast falls under the shadow of the Dark Lord. And in the middle, things go even worse. Dorthonion is entirely overrun, and the elven lords Angrod and Eagnor are both slain defending their homes, which is of course a big deal because Angrod and Eagnor are both brothers of Galadriel. Her eldest brother, Finrod Felagund, does march north from his secret stronghold of Nargothrond to lend aid to Angrod and Eagnor, but he's too late to save them, and he is almost slain himself in this battle. The forest of Dorthonion is corrupted into an evil place known forever after as Tower Nufuin, the forest under Nightshade, which, as of the last time we saw him, is now home to Sauron, who interestingly fled there in a vampire's form after being ousted from the island of werewolves by Luthien Tinuviel. Anyway, finally, in the northwest, Morgoth strikes here, the realm of Fingolfin. Now, unlike Dorthonion and the lands of the Sons of Feyenoor, Fingolfin's realm of Hithlum doesn't actually fall in the Dargor Bragolak, but its inhabitants do suffer an immense defeat nevertheless. Hithlum is home to both elves and men, and during this battle, the men of the House of Hador, that's the elf friends who follow Fingolfin, lose a huge number of their warriors. Their women and children do remain safe behind the Mountains of Shadow, but the chieftain of these men, Hador Lorindol, is slain, and so his leadership passes to his eldest son, Galdor the Tall, who I will talk more about just a little later in this video. But, as you'll know if you saw last week's video, the most significant consequence of the Dargor Bragolak is the death of High King Fingolfin, the unbelievable badass who gave his life to inflict 7 permanent wounds on the Dark Lord himself. And so, this is the post-Fingolfin Beleriand that we now find ourselves in. The long peace that followed the glorious Dargor Aglareb is well and truly a thing of the past. The entire tone of the story has shifted, and things are now destined to get an awful lot darker. In fact, Tolkien tells us after the 4th battle, there was never again peace in Beleriand. War never ceased from this moment. The north has fallen, and now orcs wander freely far and wide, and although there are still bastions of elvish resistance, as well as some mannish and dwarvish resistance in Beleriand, the pendulum has very much swung in Morgoth's favour. Now, in the next 2 videos, I will talk all about the specifics of this epic 5th battle and how it changes everything. But for the rest of this video, I want to focus on the 17 years that take place between the 4th battle and the 5th. In some ways, this period kind of represents the aftermath of the Dargor Bragolak, but in other ways, it is kind of a prelude to the 5th battle. And I'll begin by taking a look at what's left of Beleriand after the smoke of the Dargor Bragolak clears. So right in the centre of the map we have the great Sindarin kingdom of Doriath, the realm that is ruled by High King Eleuthingol and his wife Melian the Maya. And Doriath is of course unique in that it is protected by the divine power of Melian. Back in the day, she cast a sort of defensive barrier around her husband's realm known as the Girdle of Melian. And this unseen wall of shadow and bewilderment, as Tolkien calls it, prevents anyone from entering the guarded realm without the permission of the king or queen. And so, unlike pretty much everywhere else in Beleriand, Doriath is relatively untouched by the Dargor Bragolak. However, Melian's protection only extends so far as her magical barrier does, and the woods that lie outside of it are very vulnerable to the rampaging orcs that are now free to roam into central Beleriand, either by the pass of Sirion in the west or the pass of Arglon in the east. And Tolkien gives us a really sinister detail here that honestly kind of keeps me up at night if I think too much about it. We are told that Morgoth's forces pursued his foes relentlessly, but what's especially horrible is that not all of the Noldor and Sindar that they came upon were killed. Many they took captive and led to Angband and made them thralls, forcing them to use their skills and their knowledge in the service of Morgoth. But elvish slavery in the pits of Angband, which literally translates to Hell of Iron, by the way, isn't even the worst part of this. After the Dargor Bragolak, Morgoth sent out spies that were clad in false forms, and deceit was in their speech. These spies used lies and cunning words to spread fear among the free elves, and to convince them that their greatest peril was of treachery one to another. And so the hearts and minds of many elves in Beleriand became clouded with despair and with fear. And thanks to the now long dead Feyenoor, this fear of treason by kin unto kin does contain a measure of truth. So many elves become really paranoid of their own people, which is especially tragic for the thralls that Morgoth enslaved in Angband. We are told that after being forced to labour in his hellish pits, some of these elven thralls were used for other evil purposes. Morgoth feigned to give them liberty, and he sent them abroad and allowed them to go back to their homes and back to their people. But because of the spies that he sent out before them, the free elves feared these former slaves, for their wills were still chained to Morgoth's. Therefore, if any of the thralls actually did escape for real, they would be outcast by their own people, and they'd have no choice but to wander as desperate outlaws, or to go back to the Dark Lord who enslaved them. Just imagine being one of those elves. You know, you belong to a race of people who are generally so joyous and take such delight in nature and singing and music and poetry, but then you were seized by orcs and enslaved in what is pretty objectively the worst place in the world. And then, even if you do manage to escape, even if you do seize your freedom, you have no one to go back to. Other people's fear has made you an outcast, and you are doomed to either wander alone or return to the absolute monster who did this to you. It's such a downward spiral of ruin, and it's reason 10,001 why Morgoth is just the most despicable character ever. Anyway, this is primarily a problem for the elves living in the undefended wilds. But in the northwest of Beleriand, the realm that once belonged to Fingolfin is now ruled by his firstborn son, the new High King Fingon. And despite the fact that his realm of Hithlum is pretty close to Angband, it is very well protected by the Mountains of Shadow, the Ered Wethrine, and so, for now, the people living there are relatively safe. However, Fingon does seem to realise that this will not forever be the case, and the reason we know this is because pretty immediately after the Dargor Bragolak, Fingon made the decision to send his son, his heir, away from Hithlum to go and live in the coastal havens of the south, where Círdan the Shipwright rules the Falathrim. And so, throughout the rest of the First Age, Fingon's very young son, who also happens to be the Noldor's future High King, is raised by Círdan, and fostered safely under his wing. And the reason that this is such a cool detail is because Fingon's very, very young son is none other than the Noldorine hero who will one day go on to be called Gil-galad, the last High King of the Noldor, who will rule throughout the Second Age, and alongside Elendil he will lead the armies of the Last Alliance against Sauron in about 3,500 years' time. However, as I say this, my YouTuber sense is tingling, and I feel that at this very moment there may be one or two of you very knowledgeable people who are currently writing out a comment telling me how wrong I am. It's okay, put your keyboards down. I am aware that the question of Gil-galad's parentage is a very complicated one, and I don't want to be found guilty of spreading misinformation, so in the next few weeks I will release a whole video explaining the two potential origins of Gil-galad, and how I believe the question of who his father is fundamentally changes his character. But for now, what the Silmarillion tells us is that Gil-galad is the son of Fingon, and after the death of his grandfather Fingolfin, he was sent away to the havens of Círdan the Shipwright to be fostered by him throughout the rest of the First Age. Anyway, interesting as that may be, it doesn't have a huge amount to do with the Fifth Battle of Beleriand, so I will swiftly move on and turn the focus of this video onto the men of Beleriand. You see, it was during this period of the First Age that a fourth group of men first entered Beleriand and became a relevant part of the story. Prior to this, we only had three kindreds, the House of Beor, the House of Haleth, and the House of Hador, all of whom I will talk about in just a sec. But first I want to talk about the coming of the Easterlings. Now, I guess the first thing to say about the Easterlings is that although Tolkien uses this same name for the much more familiar group of men in The Lord of the Rings, the Easterlings of the First Age are not those Easterlings. Those Easterlings are men of Rhûn, and during the Third Age they serve Sauron and fight against the men of Gondor, and also the men of Dale and the dwarves of Erebor in the War of the Ring. However, the Easterlings of the Silmarillion are quite different. We're not actually told exactly where they hail from, but they arrive in the northeast of Beleriand, so my assumption would be that they probably hail from lands that will in the Second and Third Age be the far north of Middle-earth. Perhaps they share heritage with the snowmen of Forachel, or potentially even the men of Angmar. Anyway, there are two specific Easterling chieftains to mention by name, and they are the greatest two, Ulfang and Bor. Although, fun fact, both Ulfang and Bor are Elvish names, which means they almost certainly weren't the names that the actual characters would use and call themselves. They are simply the names by which the elven historian, who supposedly chronicled their role in the Silmarillion, knew them by. And these disparate groups of men from lands east of Beleriand are a pretty interesting bunch. They're really quite different from the three houses of Beor and Hador and Haleth, and Tolkien tells us they were short and broad, long and strong in the arm, and some had greater liking for the dwarves of the mountains than for the elves. Now, I guess the elephant in the room here is that they are also described as swarthy men, with skin that is swart or sallow. And neither swart nor sallow would be particularly sensitive words if they were used in the 21st century, although I do want to point out that I think the reason they are used instead of more common words like bronze or tanned is entirely to do with how much of a word nerd J.R.R. Tolkien really was, professor of philology and Anglo-Saxon, and it has very little to do with early modern ideas of race. Both swart and sallow are cognates of the German word schwarz, whereas both bronze and tanned have Old French in their etymologies, and the truth is that in most cases Tolkien simply preferred to use words that were of a Germanic Anglo-Saxon origin rather than French words that entered the English language through the Norman conquests, which brought an end to Anglo-Saxon culture and Tolkien famously really didn't like. So I definitely think this part of his writings is best viewed through a very early medieval lens of language instead of the much more recent early modern lens of race. Anyway, these Easterlings, unsurprisingly, settle in the east of Beleriand, and that is where the Sons of Feyenoor live. Now, the eldest son of Fëanor, and in my opinion the most interesting, is Maedhros the Tall, and with the possible exceptions of his dead father and his dead uncle, there is no one in all Beleriand who hates Morgoth more than Maedhros. Maedhros is a massively important character in the story of the Fifth Battle, and he is the first elf to make an alliance with these newly arrived men of the East. Maedhros takes Bor and his sons Borlad, Borlach and Borthand into his service, and for the rest of their lives these men are faithful friends to Maedhros and his lovely younger brother Maglor. However, the other Easterling chief, Ulfang, along with his sons Ulfast, Ulwath and Uldor, enter the service of Maedhros' far dodgier brother, Caranthir the Dark, and they settle in his lands and swear allegiance to him. But the truth is, these Easterlings don't really have very much of a relationship at all with the Edain. While they build lives for themselves in East Beleriand, the three houses of the Edain are moving further and further west to try and escape the horrific aftermath of the Dargor Bragolak. As I've already mentioned, in the middle of the north, Dorthonion is entirely overrun by evil things, and all the men and elves that once lived there are now gone. Some of the men of the House of Beor followed a lady called Emeldir, that's the mother of Beren, and they fled south as refugees to the woodlands of Brethiel, where they lived among the forest-dwelling Haladin, that's men of the House of Haleth, while others followed the cousins Morwen and Rian west into the lands of Dor Lomin, which were originally gifted to the House of Hador by Fingon himself. And so, in Dor Lomin, a small scattering of the House of Beor do continue to exist within the protection of Fingon's Noldorin realm of Hithlum, but the point I'm making is that every member of the House of Beor is either dead or living as a refugee. Their homeland is entirely conquered by the enemy. And those two women that I mentioned, Morwen and Rian, they are both going to be really quite important in the near future, so keep them in your minds. Morwen will be the mother of the children of Húrin. But before I move on from Dor Lomin, I will quickly circle back to that guy Galdor the Tall, son of Hador Lorindal, who is now chieftain of the House of Hador. And the most important thing to know right now about Galdor is his family, and how it relates to another mannish family in Beleriand. You see, Galdor had a sister called Glorithel, and he has a wife called Hareth. And Hareth has a brother called Haldir, not to be confused with the elf Haldir from The Lord of the Rings. And Haldir, brother of Hareth, has a wife called Glorithel, sister of Galdor. So basically what we have here is a brother and a sister from one family marrying a sister and a brother from another family. And whereas Galdor and Glorithel were the children of Hador, and so they are effectively the heirs to the House of Hador, Haldir and Hareth are the great-great-nephew and niece of the Lady Haleth. And so they are kind of heirs to the House of Haleth, which means any children that these two unions may produce would have a very awesome blend of heritage from both Hador and Haleth's houses. And as it goes, they do have children. Haldir and Glorithel have a son who doesn't really matter right now, but their grandson will matter a little bit later. And Galdor and Hareth have two sons, and they are basically the main characters of this entire trilogy of videos, along with Fingon and Maedhros. Their names are Húrin and Huor, and they are both super important, but Húrin is of course the guy who features in the title of that standalone novel, The Children of Húrin. So remember these guys too. In fact, the reason that I said to remember Morwen and Rian a moment ago is because those two cousins from the House of Beor are going to go on to marry these two brothers from the houses of Hador and Haleth. Anyway, although Húrin and Huor are born to Galdor and Hareth in Dor Lomin, they actually spend their youths being fostered by their uncle Haldir and living among their mother's people, the woodland-dwelling Haladin, within their forest of Brethiel. Now, the Haladin of the House of Haleth are quite a bit different from their fellow men in the houses of Hador and Beor, and whereas the other two houses live predominantly within the Noldor's sphere of influence, the Haladin live within the sphere of the Sindar. They are entirely independent, but when the going gets tough, it is to the elf realm of Doriath that they turn, and to the High King Eleuthingol, who rules there. We are told that 1 year after the 4th battle, and thus 16 years before the 5th battle, a war band of orcs broke into central Beleriand, and there was a battle between them and the woodsmen of Brethiel. But the Haladin were stout-hearted men, and would not lightly forsake the woods that they loved, and amid the tale of defeats of that time, the deeds of the Haladin are remembered with honour. And there's a small but incredibly cool detail here. Tolkien writes that the Lord of the Haladin, Halmir, that's Húrin and Huor's grandfather, sent swift word to his friend, King Eleuthingol. And Eleuthingol sent to Halmir Sindarin warriors of Doriath, who were led by an epic character called Beleg Cuthalion. Now, Beleg is one of my top 5 favourite elven characters. I have been incredibly excited to talk about him since I first started this channel, and it's so nearly the right time to go into full detail on why he is so awesome, but he won't become properly relevant until a few videos' time, so I will wait just a little bit longer for that. However, I will say that in this battle, the great strength of Sindarin warriors under Beleg's command are described as fighting with elven axes. And elves with axes is not something we see a huge amount of in Tolkien's Legendarium, but we do see it here. And I think it's a very cool detail that gives a dash of variety to our elven warriors. These ones, from Doriath, use axes. And we are told that with these axe-wielding Sindar and the stout-hearted Haladin, Beleg and Halimir took an orc legion at unawares and destroyed it. In fact, their defence of Brethiel was so well fought that thereafter the black tide out of the north was stemmed in that region, and the orcs dared not cross the river Tageline for many years after. So, although the House of Harleth may not be quite as iconic as the houses of Hador and Beor, they are incredibly badass. And so are their foster sons, Húrin and Huor, two young brothers who both encounter an utterly unique set of circumstances quite early on in their lives, and as a result they experience something that no mortal has ever seen before, and only one shall ever see again. So, during that battle that I just mentioned with Beleg and Halimir, Huor was only 13 years old, and yet he and Húrin went off with their uncle and their grandfather to fight the orcs and to defend their adopted home. However, during the fighting, the two boys were part of a host that was cut off from the rest, and together they were pursued north to the ford of Brithiach. And here they would have been taken or slain, but they weren't. And that is due to the power of a god. Well, a Valar, little g god. It's been a pretty long time since we've last seen any of the Valar in this story. They were a very big deal right in the beginning, but when the Noldor journeyed away from the Undying Lands, it was decreed that the Valar would lend neither help nor hindrance. The official Valar company line was to leave the people of Middle-earth alone. However, there was one Valar who thought, in the light of this whole Morgoth thing, that is a bit of a ludicrous policy. And so, time and again, he does get involved in the affairs of Middle-earth, and he gives a few nudges to a few characters that just kind of give the good guys a bit of a helping hand. And this is one of those moments. So, the Valar that I'm talking about is one of the greatest of them all, Ulmo, the Lord of Waters. And as the Lord of Waters, Ulmo is able to raise a mist from the river that conceals Húrin and Huor from the pursuing orcs, and it allows them to escape from the ford. However, instead of returning south to their home, the boys head north, and they wander among the hills beneath the sheer mountain walls of Chrysaegrim. And because the boys did not know this land, and also because they're children, Húrin is 16, Huor is 13, they swiftly become lost and bewildered, and they know not the way to go on, nor to return. But beneath the peaks of Chrysaegrim, Húrin and Huor are being watched. For it is in these encircling mountains that the great eagles of Manwë build their eyries, and the lord of all these eagles is called Thorondor. So, Thorondor sent two of his subjects to fly down and to bear the boys over the mountains and beyond, to the secret Vale of Tumladen, upon which is built the super secret elven city of Gondolin, which no man yet had seen. Now, the king and also founder of Gondolin is, of course, Turgon, the younger brother of High King Fingon. And when Turgon found that Thorondor's eagles had brought him a pair of mortal children to take care of, he received them well. For Turgon had been given messages and dreams from Ulmo. He'd been warned by the Valar that woe would one day come to his people, but he must deal kindly with the sons of the House of Hador, from whom help should come to him at need. And so, the woodland-dwelling boys, Húrin and Huor, dwelt as guests of King Turgon in the greatest elven city ever to exist in Middle-earth. During their stay, they learned much lore of the elves, and Turgon took great liking for the sons of Galdor, and spoke much with them, and he wished indeed to keep them in Gondolin out of love. And there are two interesting things that come to mind here. First, I can't help thinking of Aragorn when I read this part of the story. He too was raised by an elf who loved him dearly. In fact, he was raised by Turgon's great-grandson, Elrond. And Aragorn himself is a direct descendant of Huor's. So I think there is a really cool parallel between Aragorn's time in Rivendell and Huor and Húrin's time in Gondolin. But the second thing is the way that Ulmo fits into all of this. It was Ulmo who gave Turgon the vision, or the warning, or the instructions, the guidance to build Gondolin in the first place. It was Ulmo who saved Húrin and Huor, which allowed for their coming to Gondolin, and without wanting to spoil what's going to happen, Ulmo will have one more really, really important intervention in Beleriand's history, and that intervention is the direct cause of Huor's son becoming one of the main characters in the later Gondolin storyline. It seems that throughout the Silmarillion, Turgon's city of Gondolin, Ulmo, the Lord of Waters, and the bloodline of Huor, son of Galdor, are 3 points of an incredibly mythological triangle. There's a really important connection there. Anyway, after well nigh a year of living as guests in Gondolin, Húrin and Huor voiced their desire to leave Turgon's city and to return to their own people, who must now surely think they are dead. However, there is a complication here. Turgon really wants them to stay, and not just because he loves having them around, although that is a big part of it, but there's also actually a law that prevents them from leaving. As I mentioned, Gondolin is super secret, and no one but its inhabitants, and also the eagles, know exactly where it is. In order to keep that secret, there is a city-wide law that no stranger, whether elf or man, was ever allowed to look upon Gondolin and then depart it with the knowledge. However, Turgon is not a tyrant, and Húrin and Huor both make some very good points about why they should be the exception. First, they point out that as mortals, they don't have the luxury of waiting around for a far distant day when Turgon will make Gondolin's existence public. No matter what they do, they'll eventually grow old and die. Such is the complicated gift of men. And instead of waiting out all the battles that are afflicting their people, they want to join them and fight while they still have the strength to. The other point they make is that technically neither Húrin nor Huor do know the location of Gondolin. They know they were lost in the hills north of Brithiach, and then an eagle flew them into the sky, but we are told that they were brought to the city in fear and wonder, and in mercy our eyes were veiled. So Turgon gives the brothers leave to return to their own people, but there are two conditions. First, they must go back the way they came, aka an eagle, and second, they must convince the people of Gondolin that they will never reveal to anyone the counsels of Turgon, and they will forever keep the secret that they have seen. By volunteering to swear an oath, Húrin and Huor achieve this, and so with the king's permission, the brothers leave. Although, just before they do, Turgon says to them, "I grieve at this parting, yet in a little while, as the Eldar account it, we may meet again." And spoiler, they do. Anyway, by night, two eagles bear Húrin and Huor away from Gondolin forever, and they bring them back to the lands of their father, Dor-lómin. And of course, when the brothers return, everyone is astounded and overjoyed, for the Haladin had told Galdor that his sons were missing and presumed dead after being last seen running the wrong way from orcs. So everyone wants to know, where they've been, and they ask some good questions, such as, did you really live in the wilds for a year? 'Cause you look well fed and you're wearing really nice clothes, and also you look more like young princes than waifs of the wood. But to all these questions, Húrin and Huor say nothing, save that their return was permitted only by an oath of silence. And so the questions stop. And the heirs of Dor-lómin settle in the lands of their parents, and they never speak to anyone of their unconventional year in Gondolin. However, unfortunately, this is a dark time in Beleriand's history, and only 3 years after their return, Húrin and Huor, now aged 21 and 18 respectively, find themselves involved in another battle with invading orcs. and this one has a fair share of tragedy to it. You see, 7 years after the end of the fourth battle, Morgoth sent a great force of orcs against the only large elven realm left standing in the north, Fingon's kingdom of Heathlum. And during this attempted invasion, the men of Dor Lomyn fight with the High King Fingon just as they fought with Fingolfin in the fourth battle. And outside the exact same fortress where Hador Lorindol was killed in the Dargor Bragolak, his son Galdor the Tall is also slain by an orc arrow. And this means that the lordship of the House of Hador now passes to Galdor's son, Húrinn. He's only newly come to manhood, but we are told that Húrinn was great in strength, both in mind and body, and he drove the orcs with heavy slaughter far across the sands of Anfauglith. Now, while that was all happening, High King Fingon was busy fighting orcs on the other side of his realm, and interestingly, despite the fact that he was outnumbered, he ultimately won this fight due to the arrival of Círdan the Shipwright and his warriors from the coastal havens of Eglarest and Brithombar, who sailed in such great strength that the orcs broke and fled before them, until they were hunted down by Fingon's horse-riding archers. So after this mini-battle, which isn't considered one of the main five, Húrinn, chief of the House of Hador, swears loyalty and service to High King Fingon, which is very, very cool because Fingon is of course the elder brother of Turgon, which means the two mortal sons of Galdor have now both sworn loyalty to the two immortal sons of the late High King Fingolfin, but neither elf knows it about the other. Anyway, not long after their father's death, both Húrinn and Huor get married, and their wives are those two cousins, Morwen and Rian, of the House of Beor, who led their people to Dor Lomyn after the fall of Dorthonion. Now, you don't need me to tell you how iconic the children of Húrinn are going to be, and I promise I will talk all about them in the relatively near future. But this is where I will leave Húrinn and Huor for now. Because there is just one more thing that I need to talk about before the end of this video, and that is the single event which galvanizes these murky 16 years of general conflict into the decisive fifth battle. The event that fundamentally changes how the enemies of Morgoth view their war. You see, for the first 10 years, pretty much everything that happens in Beleriand is an aftermath of the Dargor Bragolak. But then, in the year 466 of the First Age, while all the other things I've talked about in this video were going on, a single mortal man and a single elf maiden literally walked up to the gates of Angband. They snuck inside and they stole a Silmaril. I mean, there's a lot more to it than that. I have 11 videos explaining it, but together, these two individuals, Beren and his beloved Luthien, accomplished something that all the combined armies of the Noldor and Sindar and Falathrim and all the houses of men and all the clans of dwarves have so far failed to do. They proved to all Beleriand that Morgoth is not untouchable. He's not unconquerable, and all hope is not yet lost. And if one guy and one elf can come together to steal a Silmaril from the crown atop Morgoth's head in his own fortress while he's sleeping, then what could be achieved if all three peoples united? What could be won if every single enemy of Morgoth's made an alliance? If they combined their might and fought as one? Well, that question is what turns the aftermath of the fourth battle into the prelude for the fifth. And I will talk all about it in my next video. I'll begin the tale of the deciding battle for the future of Beleriand. So, to make sure you don't miss it, hit subscribe if you haven't already, and click like and leave a comment on this video if you want to. However, until next time, as always, my dear friends, much love. Stay groovy and Navaya Melanine.